crucial APIs you need to know about it. It's moderated by Matt Hunckler from Verge. So Matt, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much. We've got a great panel here today. People from all over the country here, a lot from DC, but all kinds of experience and expertise. And we all just had lunch actually, and I got to talk a little bit about what we want to chat about. And mostly we want to chat about what's important to you guys. So if I could just get like a show of hands, like how many of you actively develop using APIs? How many of you are more on the business side of things? Investors? Damn. All right. So we got the business and the tech folks. And what I wanted to do is just kind of open it up and allow you guys to do self-introductions. Like, even though we just had an hour-long lunch, I feel like you guys probably know yourselves a little better than I do. And then also, like, as you give an introduction, maybe just how you might describe what an API is, and in your own words, without just using the definition.
Check. Fail. All right, this thing's on. My name is Brian Vargas. I am a software developer here in the DC area. I actually live in DC. I have been programming computers since I was 5 years old, and professionally since 2000. I spent a few years in the dot-com boom-bust era, spent 7 years working with the Library of Congress in the Repository Development Center, doing digital repositories, building systems for acquisition and workflow, and archiving for the long term. I currently work for a very large tech company that you've probably heard of, but I'm not here on behalf of them. I'm here on my own just as a developer who's interested in APIs. So just had to say that specifically in case someone's watching. For me, APIs are all about interaction. They're all about, as software developers, the kinds of things that we're trying to accomplish that are difficult to do, and we need to interact with the system in a way that is predictable and expected, but that has a level of abstraction that is higher than the level that the API is built on. Interaction and abstraction are kind of the two words for me that best describe an API. I'm going to pass that down.
Okay, I think your foot is on my cord. Excuse me. Thanks. Hi, my name is Sasha Londi, and this is the first talk I've given in a planetarium, so that's pretty cool. I started my journey through learning APIs while working at Twilio, which is a telephony API out in San Francisco. So I got a lot of practice explaining what an API is to people at bars and random people I met around San Francisco, because otherwise they're like, oh cool, Twilio, is that Trulia? And I'm like, no, that's a real estate company. And so they're like, okay, what's Twilio? And basically I explained it as a way that you can let different services talk to each other. So if you have a website and you want to make a map on Google Maps, you have a way of communicating that information to Google Maps, and then it gives you a map back and you can put it on your website. So it's a way that you can allow two services like your website and Google Maps to talk to each other. And I usually give a few serious examples which like don't really impress anyone, but the one example that really helped people get it is this one by a developer named Ricky Robinette out in Brooklyn, New York. And it's called fakegirlfriend.co. And it's a 212 number that you can text to prove to your friends that you have a girlfriend, and it will respond to you within a few minutes with a girly text message, and then a few minutes later we'll call you and play an MP3, which is I now know is recorded by his wife Hannah, saying girlfriendy things to you, so you can like have a conversation with this MP3 on the phone. So I think that's one of my favorite Twilio apps. It definitely gets the point across to people who have never heard of an API before. So sadly I left Twilio. I'm now at Codecademy out in New York City, where it's currently snowing, and doing some interesting work there that I'll talk about later relating to APIs.
Hi, my name is Evgeny Popov. I've been more than 15 years in IT as a developer, architect, lead of development team. Now I run a company. It's Epiphany, based in Washington, D.C. We are a startup, and we have a product that helps companies manage, launch, and scale their web APIs. So I kind of in API space for more than 1 year, working on my company. And first problem that we had when we start selling our product was explain exactly in a bar and in elevator what is an API, what we are selling. And we ran a contest on Twitter, what is an API for dummies, for not technical people. And we got really good responses. And my favorite way to explain now what is an API, it's if you open your mobile app or mobile device, you have a lot of apps. And each app talks to something on somewhere. And this something somewhere is an API. So every app on your mobile device is connected to an API. That's how we explain what is an API, and that's my favorite way to explain it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Greg Sipes. I've been coding since before I can remember, and worked at AOL from 1999 to 2010. I was the tech lead for OpenAIM, which was the first open real-time communication API built on top of our instant messaging network. And since then, now I run a product called AddThis, which is based here in Washington, D.C., which is the largest social sharing platform and analytics platform on the internet. It supports 14 million publishers, 1.3 billion unique users a month, and it's all API-based. So APIs are sort of in my blood. And when I think about an API, I think about it's the only thing besides a saw that can get a square peg through a round hole. It allows you to turn a Yugo into a BMW. It allows you to do things that you maybe shouldn't even do. And I think it's a very powerful thing that you can play with. What it can mean to each of you in the room is going to be different. I can ask each of you, what is an API, or what are the most important APIs for you? And you guys would probably all come up with a different answer. So it also depends on your needs as well.
Those are great. And so the title of this is the 5 best APIs, right? And so we're going to kind of build up to that, but then also save some time for Q&A and ask maybe why those are some of your favorite APIs. And of course, best is relative, right? Depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And this was a discussion we had at lunch. But one of the things that I just kind of wanted to open the discussion about, like what makes a good API and maybe why you might want to build on an API. Why would or why wouldn't you want to build on an API or leveraging an API? And maybe we work from that end and come down this way. And I think that the mobile mics work as long as you have the switch flipped to on. Give it 1 second.
Hello? There we go. Hooray. So why should we build on APIs? Sometimes you want to build on an API for rapid deployment and rapid, get code shipped. You can imagine if you had to write a library to do things like real-time communication or to build a library to chart out data. If you were to build that yourself, it would take tons of manpower and computing power that an API can save you, massive amounts of hours. Even if it does cost some money to use that API, it's still cheaper than if you were to build it yourself.
I think API. Sorry. Can you,
Sure. Yeah.
And jump in wherever.
Sure, yeah.
Don't feel like we have to like go single file down the row.
Order.
Right?
Cool.
Yeah.
I think another advantage is sometimes you can tap into resources that the API or the company has already accumulated. I think Facebook is one really good example of this. They have more than 1 billion users, and most people have a lot of friends on it. So that can be really useful if you don't want... network effects are really powerful when building up a product. So if you have a product where you have social interactions and you don't want to have to spin that up from scratch and acquire 1 billion users yourself, which might take some time, you can just tap into that resource that Facebook has and add those features to your product or your site really easily.
So on that note, about the Facebook API, that was something that kind of came up over lunch. And just about any day you check out Hacker News, there's bound to be one post of someone complaining about the Facebook API. What is it about that API in particular that people tend to complain about, and how do you think that they might be able to make it better? Anyone can jump in there.
So I've used their API for a while, and actually, for full disclosure, when I was at AOL, they used our API as well for AIM. And I think there's two things that happens with Facebook. One, the rug gets pulled out from under developers all the time. Making a good API sometimes has to come down to being willing to support stuff that you don't want to support anymore. Even if it can be painful at times. Facebook seems to always change the rules on developers and, for that matter, businesses all the time. If you talk to brands, how many times has a brand page changed? Once it was called a fan page, and it was called something else, and now it's called something even further from fan page. So I think that part of the frustration with Facebook is the evolution of their platform. And maybe they launched it too soon. And that may be the lesson from Facebook. Maybe they opened up their APIs before they were ready.
An interesting point to that is that you can go to the other extreme, right? Notably, this talk is actually not good APIs, it's crucial APIs. And one of the things that makes an API crucial is how ubiquitous it is, how many people are using it, is it an important platform? You take the other extreme, Win32. If you've ever done any Windows 32 programming, you know what a horrible, horrible, horrible API it is. On the other hand, there's a whole ton of people out there that have spent entire careers working in it because they have no choice, because that platform was ubiquitous and needed to be supported. And Microsoft, to their credit, or detriment, depending on your opinion, has spent a lot of time, energy, and money not dumping those APIs, keeping them supported, supporting things that made sense when Windows was still 16-bit, and now it's 64-bit. And those kinds of things have changed dramatically over the years. You can go the other way.
I think one thing you're also hearing in both of their comments is that there are a few different things that make a good API. One is the business interest in terms of how much time do you want to devote to acquiring users or whatever. And the other is what he said, it's a good API, or one word I hear developers use a lot for bad APIs is painful to use. It takes a lot of time, it causes a lot of aggravation. You're spending your time developing around obstacles that seem trivial and aren't really related to the core work. And so there's some APIs out there that are brilliantly and beautifully designed, and developers absolutely love working with them. You can do searches for some of the best APIs on Twitter and just see tweet after tweet about developer being like, wow, I just got up to speed in 3 hours with my app. This is amazing, and they get really excited. So the design of the API plays a large role, and obviously the companies like Twilio and SendGrid are going to, where their core business is an API, they're going to have really good APIs because they want developers to pick them up and run with them. Whereas other companies where the API is sort of like a more peripheral part of their product and their offerings, or maybe not as crucial to their business flow or interests, it's sort of a little bit neglected. I recently built an app on the Fitbit API. A Fitbit is a little... how many of you have Fitbits? Just curious. Okay, a few other nerds. It's this little pedometer that you wear that measures not only how much you walk, but how many stairs you climb, how you sleep, all that kind of thing. And I wanted to write an app to make my life easier, to record some data through my cell phone every day instead of having to log into the website. And Fitbit is a great product, but they're really not focused on the API, and getting this app running took a really long time, and way longer than it should have for a pretty trivial app. So when you're building an API or using one thing to think about is how easy is it to pick up and use, depending on how much time you have, and so on and so forth. But that's an important factor.
And I think that good API should bring some value. It should help you to unleash creativity and innovation. For instance, Twilio, it's one of my favorite API. It helps you dramatically reduce development effort to build really cool and innovative applications. If there's no Twilio API, you would spend years to build something cool as
Literally.
As you can build using Twilio in the hours. That's really important. If API gives you interesting data or give you an access to interesting functionality that can help you to be innovative, that's very important.
I love that you said creative there, because if you're using tools that get out of your way and let you just focus on the core creative work, that's the sort of tool you want to use in any discipline, whether it's painting or development or whatever. And a good API can do that for you.
So it sounds like one of the challenges for Facebook APIs is the product is just rapidly evolving and it's very complex. What are some of the challenges for software? So say the product is fairly simple and not that rapidly evolving. So say like Twitter. What are some of the challenges of having something that's just so easy to use and lots of people are going to build on top of it?
Yep. I think that problem with Facebook API, it's they have no competition. As we said before, you have to use it because even if it's horrible, not well documented, you have no choice. If you want to build, if you want to be part of Facebook ecosystem, you'll use it. And for some other APIs, when you have competition, like Twilio, you have to be really good. You need to have really good developer portal and developer experience to compete. With Facebook, they can go this way and don't pay a lot of attention at developer adoption before competition come in place.
It becomes a supply and demand issue as well, right? I mean, the demand for Facebook's APIs, just in the last few months, some of the publishers we've talked to, and I can't name names, but they're big people. Some of them are very, very well-known names, are moving further away from relying on Facebook as a platform to have a relationship with their customers. It's like what's old is new. Email is becoming a much more interesting medium to have that control of the conversation with their customers. And then from a supply point of view, Facebook's API supply is dubious at best at times. While on Twitter's side, their simplicity of their API, it hasn't changed a whole lot. I know they just launched the latest version this past summer. That simplicity has created more demand essentially going forward. I think it's also interesting, an API that doesn't exist yet, but I've heard more and more demand for is actually a Pinterest API. And people want to consume media, specifically photos, and push their photos out, and they're having a hard time playing in that space because you're using only the Pinterest tools to do that today.
When you look at building on an API, a lot of these are free, right? But then some of them are also pay to play, right? So like using some of the Twilio's more advanced tools, maybe you have to pay to use it. Besides those risks and those kind of costs, what are maybe some other risks or costs that either you guys have run into or you've seen with other developers in building on top of APIs or leveraging them?
Well, scaling is certainly always an issue because if your system is built in such a way that it scales differently than the underlying system that you're relying on, you can start to hit bottlenecks a lot more quickly than you would otherwise hit. And it works the other way when you're implementing an API and designing an API. Some of the simplest APIs are often built from the perspective of, well, we just need to put something on top of this, and it's a very thin layer so people can get access to it. And then a year and a half later, when your scaling needs have changed completely, suddenly the API doesn't make any sense at all. It's orthogonal to your actual implementation, and you have to do a lot of work to try and maintain that API and plumb everything through and have it all keep working. So you end up on both sides of it. Scaling can bite you on both ends if you're not careful.
Yeah, likewise, if you are offering an API and you offer a specific feature or primitive as part of your feature set, and then you later decide you want to remove it, if you have hundreds or thousands of developers building using that feature and relying on it perhaps for their core business, they're going to put up a stink if you try to remove it. So a general rule of thumb in designing a good API is that it's easy to add features later. It's a lot harder to take them away once you have them in place. So that is one risk of having people build on your API is there's a support cost for everything you add to it. And if you design it poorly, your support department will suffer because they'll get a lot of emails about it that can frustrate them.
And you will suffer as well if you're the guy who designed it.
Yeah, exactly, because then the support department will come after you, right? So there are non-trivial costs with having people build on your platform, and hopefully it's worth it.
Yeah, support is the hardest thing at the end of the day. I mean, I hate the word tier 3 support because that was me when I wrote the API, and it's hard to have to manage that. I mean, today there are great APIs and tools to help manage the API, your API support. We use desk.com, which used to be Assistly. And it works great to support 14 million publishers worldwide is challenging. It's a round the clock job. But I think at the end of the day, as long as we avoid the fail whale, because we can scale, unlike maybe others that haven't. I think that's I think you guys touched on it. It's scaling and it's support.
And I think that terms and conditions are very important topic when you're planning to build your business on top of someone's API. Sometimes you don't read all those documents, loan documents, but if you really building a business on top of someone's API, you better read it and you better involve lawyers and some legal forces to make sure that your business can be sustainable in a long term. Because while you're small and nobody pay attention, but if you grow, they will go after you, and you may be in trouble if you didn't pay attention early before.
I think Twitter is a great example of this. How many of you have been following the recent developer furor over the Twitter API changes? Yeah, it's been all over the nerd news. Twitter originally built its API to be, excuse me, really easy to use and beautiful, and lots of people built really awesome products on it. And later, Twitter's business interests changed, and they realized that advertising is going to be a big revenue stream for them, and specifically the advertising that is in your timeline on their website, not in a client that someone else built. And so they've been changing their API rules. That's one example. But they've been changing their API terms of service and offerings. And as a result, some really great products have been suffering as a result because they had to remove functionality because it's against Twitter's interests. And so this is really pissing off the developer community. So it's kind of an unfortunate situation that their plan would change that much. But yet another thing to consider when either building on an API or offering one.
And one more thing, it's a business. If you are building your business on top of someone's API, you should understand how sustainable the API business of API provider. Because if it's just if it's Facebook, you know that Facebook is going to be for a while. If it's someone who is providing your data or some functionality, and you don't understand how they make money on providing an API, it's risky to lose your API provider if their business is not sustainable. That's another thing that you have to consider.
I guess one solution would be to become a large enough source of revenue for that API that they won't cut you, which has been Zynga's approach. They're now a large enough portion of Facebook's revenue that I don't think Facebook is going to do anything to their API access. So symbiotic relationship. If you can shoot for that, go for it.
Are there things, I know you say, to bring lawyers in and check out the terms of services and conditions and things like that, but maybe not everyone in this room is quite to that stage where they've got a lawyer on retainer. Maybe they're still in the startup or ramp-up stage. Are there specific things in the terms of service or the conditions to just maybe look out for? Or are there horror stories that you guys have heard when building on different APIs where, maybe 6 months down the road in development kind of comes back to bite them?
GPL software is pretty safe if you know what you're doing with it, LGPL software. So sometimes the software license is pretty straightforward. I mean, we've been talking about Twitter and Facebook and commercial use software, but there's plenty of GitHub projects and open source projects and APIs that you can build off of that are, the terms and services are much more clearly defined and not hidden behind legalese. GPL software, open source software, should be stuff that at this point we're much more familiar with and comfortable with.
You have something to add?
Yeah. Similarly, not similarly at all, but with respect to things to watch out for, I think Twitter is actually instructive that you can't always look out for things, right? Twitter's API was was essentially their original corporate philosophy of their API was everyone do whatever you want with it. I wrote an IRC bot that checks Twitter and dumps a tweet stream into IRC channel that I sit in all day, right? Like, just for fun, right? I could do that. Twitter, though, has the ability, because they are a private entity and because they are the way the world works, they can change their mind and they can change the terms of service. And it's not without costs to PR and it's not potentially without costs to business, but especially when they've leveraged the network effect to the extent that they have, that they're so large, there's really not a lot you can do if they do decide to change their mind. And if you get angry at them and say, oh, I'm never going to use Twitter anymore, then you're the one losing out more than they are. So even though, yeah, you can bring in lawyers and yeah, they can do the due diligence, sometimes you're still going to get screwed.
That's true. But I do just want to put a cautionary tale out there. If those of you out there are starting companies or starting businesses, investing a little cash upfront in a lawyer consultation before you get started can save you huge headaches and problems down the road. I strongly recommend you do that. I don't know, I'm fairly new to the East Coast, so I'm not sure how good the legal infrastructure for startups is out here, but it's extremely good in San Francisco. There are law firms out there that specialize in working with startups and early stage companies, and they can sometimes work out deals for equity instead of cash. I strongly recommend that you talk to them before you start any serious business to save yourself huge headaches and wasted time and money down the road.
That's really good advice, and I'd like to back that up for sure. One of the things that when we kind of polled the audience, it looked like a lot of hand shot up said that currently using APIs or building their own APIs, and even for the people that aren't currently doing that, obviously there are all kinds of new tools and services like Codecademy that help people learn to program. And I've even heard some rumblings that Codecademy has some lessons of how to build with APIs, not without necessarily doing like a product pitch. And this isn't just a use-specific question. What are some good development rules of thumb when building on an API?
And for building the support materials for it?
Yeah, the documentation.
Keep it focused. Try and determine what you want to accomplish with the particular API that you're doing, and only do that. Make sure your preconditions and postconditions. What has to come in, what has to go out, and how is it going to respond if something doesn't go right. We were actually talking earlier. Matt had a Hootsuite dialogue pop up, and it was like API error, and we were like, ha ha ha, API error, and he said to me, well, I wish it would tell me what went wrong. And I was like, well, what would you do with that information? Because if it knew what went wrong, it should have been able to fix it. Like it shouldn't have gotten the error in the first place. So you got to determine how things are going to respond when they do go wrong, because they will go wrong. The internet is a wild place, and it's not a perfect system. So stuff's going to break, and you've got to also be able to handle those situations. And because programmers are lazy, it's got to do something useful with minimal effort. No one wants to make 14 calls just to set up a one specific thing that you're going to pass off to something else. Or it's got to be efficient for the user and efficient for the systems, because when you make a system that has a lot of back and forth, you end up with a whole bunch of latency for both the user and the system.
And samples is very important when you open up your API. Provide some samples to developers so they can understand faster what they can do with your API. And another point that I want to make is scale. Be ready to scale your API to accommodate usage that you may get unexpectedly. The problem sometimes that API provider thinks that we start slow and we will not have a lot of load on our API, and they don't think about scalability. But when you have this thing in mind, you limit yourself going full promoting your API, because you have this fear that something may go wrong. But if you have this fear, you will not be successful with your API strategy. So having insurance that you can scale at any time is very important to be successful with your API.
Absolutely. I think there are a few layers you can think of in terms of documentation. And one place to start is the API design itself. If you design your API really well, it's basically self-documenting because it's obvious to developers what it should do. For example, Twilio's API is divided up into nouns and verbs, and guess what the verb play does? It plays an MP3. So it's say will say the text in between the two say tags. It's an XML, which is similar to HTML that indicates which part of the call it should say. So say and play are basically self-documenting because it's immediately obvious what they do. Another great point is the error messages. Useful error messages can go a long way towards saving developers heartache in terms of like troubleshooting, and basically can help them bypass those roadblocks that they really shouldn't be spending their time on. It frees them up to be creative and work on their main goal. So self-documenting API and error messages are huge.
And not just during development, but also during when you're live and in production, because those are when you get the errors that you weren't expecting. Like that's the situation. You know, it's once you're actually live
Out in the wild.
out in the wild that you get the thing that you thought you would ever see, and you go, "What the heck was that?" And you have no idea where it came from. Having a good error message coming from coming from an API makes all the difference.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with all the different ways users can break things. It's really remarkable, particularly at Codecademy, where it's a platform where you can take and create interactive lessons, and we basically need to make sure that the user did the individual code exercise correctly and give them some feedback so they know if they're on the right track. And there's usually like a few right ways to do it correctly and like a gazillion ways to do it wrong, and they find some very creative ways to break our tests. So that's a big challenge. Do you want to jump in?
Dog fooding helps.
What does that mean?
Not enough people actually build their product on top of the API they're offering. I will give you a story. The story is Facebook Chat, when it first launched, actually was not built off of the API that they ended up offering. And a lot of people were wondering why actually third-party Facebook Chat apps were actually more reliable than the app on the Facebook Chat experience inside Facebook.com. Well, it's because the API was more reliable than whatever they had built the chat infrastructure off of for the website. So I think that helps flush out a lot of the issues that you see in an API, before it actually gets into third-party developers' hands as well.
That's a very, very good point about using your API yourself. And I think that analytics is sometimes underestimated. People think that I will open up my API, but if I need to know who is using API and how, I can go to log files and check what is going on. But it's become a huge problem very soon when you have no insight what is going on. It's kind of black box. You put it out and you don't know what is going on. And it's simple analytics, basic report, usage reports, and like error rate report are very important. Just make sure that it's part of your kind of API strategy, so you have at least basic analytics.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to keep in mind as you design the API. So we talked about the API design itself, the dashboard that the developers use. But the other layer is the actual documentation you provide, both in terms of a reference, so people can look stuff up if they're stuck or want to know how to do something, and the code examples that we talked about. So like sample apps that you've built that people can take and then customize to be whatever they want. And developers really don't like reading lots of text. I mean, who does? To be fair, it's not just developers. No one likes sitting and listening to someone talk for an hour. Sorry, guys. And no one likes sitting and reading 200 pages before they can touch a keyboard. People like doing things, like people who like coding want to code. They don't want to read, right? So if you can help them learn by coding, they will be happy and they will be more likely to use your tool, which is another reason why code examples are so powerful. If you add comments in the code, you can just pick it up and read it and have an idea of how it works and be like, oh, I get the hang of this. I can just go and build on it. They learn by actually looking at the code instead of looking at a manual. And to be honest, I think that's one of the reasons why the Codecademy tutorials have been so popular, is because instead of reading, I bought a Python book that has 4.5 stars on Amazon. And I flipped through it, and I had literally got to page 196 before I got to touch a keyboard. Like, that's crazy. I don't want to read about Python. I want to code in Python. Like that, you should just jump into it right away. And so we're actually starting to work with a few select APIs to produce interactive tutorials. So developers, instead of having to read stuff, they can actually just learn by doing and learn within this console. So they jump right into the code instead of having to read pages and pages and pages. So you're going to start seeing that coming out in addition to lessons on JavaScript, Ruby, Python, the other languages that we offer. So.
Did you have one other thing that you wanted to?
Yeah, one more point.
Yeah.
It's control. You need to have control over your API. I mean, if you have to have ability to shut it down for specific user, for specific developer. You have to have ability to throttle your audience based on their behavior. Sometimes you don't know what developers up to. It could be just simple mistakes the developers done, and they can just shut your system down, or it could be on purpose. So you need to have ability to shut specific developer down if you see that something's going wrong.
Yeah, I've seen people building on Twilio write an infinite loop that sends themselves 10,000 text messages before we can get to it and stop it. So definitely possible to shoot yourself in the foot sometimes.
Those are some really good perspectives, and I want to stop being so selfish and open it here in a minute to the people in the audience. And if you prefer to tweet it at me, you can do that too, just at Hunckler with the DCWEEK hashtag. We can take questions via Twitter. But we talked about the 5 most crucial APIs, which of course is totally relative. We talked about a lot of themes here, right? Simplicity, complexity on the other end of the spectrum of that, price, as well as just good documentation and things like that. So you can pick one of those themes and say, all right, these are ones with these are the 5 most crucial APIs to look at if you're looking for good documentation. Or you can just Wild West it and just say these are my 5 most crucial. So you actually get 20 because we want to under-promise and over-deliver. And maybe starting down there with you, Greg.
5. I don't know that I have 5 in my head right now. D3 is one I use all the time, which is a JavaScript library. Since we are a big data company, we do a lot of fun visualizations with data. So we can tell you that Facebook users are more likely to be voting for Romney than Twitter users vote for Obama. That's a real example we use this week. But actually visualizing it, it's a great library to basically I just throw the data into the library, and the library takes care of all the pretty visualizations. And it's an open source library without a lot of documentation, but a ton of samples. And I, as a developer, I always was a sample guy. I like looking at the code. The way I don't have an engineering background, so I have a marketing background. And to teach myself how to code, I said the 2 most important things I learned was Command C and Command V. I won't tell you how much code in AIM was actually copied. Anyway, a whole other story. From within our source, not from other people's source. And so D3 is one. I'll pimp my own. I do actually use our APIs for add this all the time. So anytime I'm setting up a new website, if I want to put social sharing in the site, I use our stuff because it really is that easy. I don't have to worry about incorporating a Facebook API, a Twitter API, a Pinterest API. I can just one API, it's done. The other ones. Google Analytics API I like a lot. We talked about analytics in general. I hope all of us have analytics in everything we do. It's one of the only ways you're ever going to get feedback on actually how your product's performing. So I use Google Analytics a lot. So those are my big 3, all for different reasons.
So when I was preparing for this panel, I was thinking about APIs, 5 APIs, and there are at least 6,000 APIs that are registered on Programmable Web. You can go and see. So I'm thinking, how can I pick these 5 APIs that I want to talk about? And I decided to to talk about utilities APIs. It's kind of APIs that you use when you are building your apps, specifically mobile apps. And my favorite 5 groups of API, it's mobile backend services, that set of APIs that helps you build mobile apps without having your own backend. So you can store data, you can create users, roles, you can use push notification easily. So it's a parse, accelerator. There are more than, but that's something that you remember some of them?
Besides that, I have a few of my own picks.
Okay, then it's Mailgun and SendGrid. Those 2 APIs helps you easily send emails and SMS messages. So you don't need to do a lot of work on your backend to be able communicate via send emails basically. And it's OCR text recognition APIs. You can use them to build really cool apps. The ones that I remember, it's Abi, very useful API. Yeah, thank you. That's my APIs, and I will leave one for you.
I have a few examples. I mean, I'm a little biased just because I know the Twilio API so well after working for them, but it really is just so much fun to build on, both because it's so easy to get started and easy to fix your mistakes, but also because there's something really magical about hitting a button on your computer and your phone ringing. Like, that's just really cool. The developer evangelists at Twilio do an amazing job of doing live coding demos and making the whole audience's phone ring at the end, and it's so cool. And it really impresses your friends if they're non-technical. So I'm a little biased towards Twilio. Good, fond place in my heart. I want to go off the wall with my other choices a little bit, because you can find on Mashable, they've got the top 100 APIs, and Apogee has a great list as well. But one I really like is kind of like a meta API. And it's like an API layer. It's called IFTTT, if this, then that. How many have used it? Yeah, okay. It's really cool because it allows you, without actually doing any programming, to connect to APIs. So for example, I used to, until Twitter changed their rules, I used to have one set up so when I'm reading my tweets, I can favorite a tweet, and if there's a link in it, it will send it to my Instapaper account. So I can read it on the subway, which gets no signal. And then in my Instapaper, if I like an article, it'll get sent to Buffer, which then gets tweeted back out to my Twitter account. So I have these actions chained together, and I did that with no programming at all. Anyone can do it. So they're doing an amazing job of linking APIs together. And it's not just web stuff. It's also they're doing some really interesting work with hardware. So like if a motion detector in your house, I think Belkin is the hardware provider that they're partnering with. Is that right? If the motion detector in your house gets set off, if you turn on your alarm, you can get a text message. So they're doing some really interesting work bridging online and offline, and it's totally leading to a future of like the laundromat texting you when your laundry's done, and other sorts of more interesting apps. Or maybe your blood sugar sensor that's embedded if you're diabetic, letting you know your blood sugar's low. I'm really, this is not from them, by the way. This is me seeing where they're going. Just want to be clear about that. But I think that company has a really cool feature. And honorable mention goes to one that we were talking about at lunch, which is, I'm not sure if it was started as a joke, but it's adorable. It's called Place Kitten, as in kitten placeholders. So if you're a web developer and you're laying out a page or need a web gallery, you basically send it a request for a kitten picture with a height and width, and it sends you back a JPEG that you can use in your layout. And I'm very entertained by this API, and Matt was telling me about there's a plugin you can get that's similar to Unbaby Me, which is a Facebook plugin that replaces all baby pictures in your Facebook timeline with kittens or with some other picture. I think they use Place Kitten as well. Is that the name of it? Or was it?
I think that's the one.
Okay, cool.
I'm not sure. It's one of those ones that
Yeah.
I installed it and I was like, yep, that's just as annoying. And then kind of uninstalled it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a stretch to call that an API because it only does one thing, but anyway. And I want to also give honorable mention to OAuth. which is not technically an API, but it's a protocol. But it basically allows you to write apps that authenticate against services. So, but it does it in a way that allows you to. It's basically, you've used it if you've ever authorized an app on Facebook or on Twitter. It lets you let third-party applications, so not you and Twitter, but a third party, use your data, but you can cut them off at any time, like them specifically. So it's not giving them your username and password, which would be the same for all of the apps. And it's a giant pain to get working. Developers kind of get frustrated by it, and it's frequently a large stumbling block. But it's really well designed and lets you build a lot of really cool stuff. So it's sort of the unsung hero of the API world, I think.
There are great APIs though for OAuth that wrap OAuth as a protocol too. So yes.
I'm gonna have to talk to you about that afterwards, because getting that Fitbit app I told you about, getting OAuth working was like 80% of the time I spent on that app. Yeah.
So everyone's talked about APIs and like web services and web systems and stuff, and I'm going to the other extreme here, because all of those are relying on the underlying network. And as far as a crucial API that every single developer needs to understand, whether or not you'll hopefully never use it because it actually kind of sucks, but you need to understand how it works and what it's doing and why it's functioning the way it is, because it bubbles up, is Berkeley sockets. Every single time you make an HTTP call or you do some magic, hey, just reach out to Twitter, it's using Berkeley sockets, and it's on every single system that everyone is using. And when things break, or when things perform weirdly, or if you're trying to do something on a wide area network or a local network, you need to understand TCP window sizes, and you need to understand latency, and you need to understand why this thing is breaking in this particular way that it's breaking, or working in the particular way that it's working. It's not pretty, but you need to understand it. It's crucial. And similarly, so many of these APIs are now built on HTTP, and it's not technically an API, but you need to understand HTTP. It's crucial to understand the difference between a 301 and a 303, and what do you do when you get a 418? Those are the kind of things that, well, at least one person got that.
That's my favorite one. These are status codes, so when you ask a server for something, you get a status code back. How many of you seen a 404? Right? Everyone's probably seen a 404. It means I have no idea where that page is that you asked me to find. It doesn't exist. 418 is I am a teapot.
There was a very old RFC that defined that for the HTTP coffee pot protocol on April Fool's Day. But it's an important one to know, because
it's real.
If you get that back, you're
probably talking to a teapot.
You're talking to a teapot and not a coffee pot, and that's important to know. But again, those kinds of things when you're troubleshooting and you're debugging and when you're building a system are important to understand, because so much of what is being done at the high level depends on these lower levels actually functioning correctly. And I said earlier, abstraction and interaction. When the abstraction fails, you have to go down a layer to figure out why something's broken, and understanding those lower level APIs is crucial.
And if you want to learn REST, keep an eye on Codecademy.
Yeah. Similarly, and this is kind of my own preference here, whatever your native platform of choice user interface API is, learn that. The web is awesome, and HTML is really, really useful, but at the end of the day, there's a reason Facebook ported their app to a native app instead of HTML5. The experience is better. It's going to be better in the long run. HTML5 has a place, but learn your native API for your platform, because it's going to be always ahead of the curve compared to something like HTML5, just because of the nature of the technology. And then kind of on the more web side, Amazon Web Services, they have become the de facto standard for how to interact with a large-scale cloud computing system. There are competing systems. It'll be interesting to see. There's current legal challenges about whether or not APIs can be copyrighted. If that happens, there are some really interesting legal ramifications for cloning of APIs and things like that. But Amazon, with what they're doing, is absolutely, it's mind-boggling how they've gotten us to all pay for their IT infrastructure. And then crucial, as much as it may suck, Facebook also. As much as I don't personally like Facebook all that much, everyone's on it. Everyone's on it. It's the only reason I'm on it. It's crucial to know, even though it sucks.
Those are all really good. And we're coming close to the end, but I want to make sure we save time for a question or two. I saw that hand first. If you want to just shout it and I'll repeat it.
Okay. Greg, you brought up something really interesting about eating your own dog food when it comes to building on top of your own APIs. So my question is, as you design internal software for your organizations, are you following principles that are similar to building an external API? And an example would be, you have different teams. Are you interacting with your software through APIs internally?
So the question in a nutshell was about dog food. And the question was about principles of API development. And are there some sort of general guidelines that you stick to?
Well, I can tell you my experiences, and I don't know, everyone's probably got a little slightly different experience, but the people who build the APIs are the same people that are building the the client experience overall. So there aren't two separate teams. The support team is separate, right? We have tier 1 support. That's a separate group, but we try to hold to a discipline that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing because it's the same team. When I was at AOL, it was a little bit different because of the nature of what we were building there, and the teams were separate. But the only way that the desktop client or the web client could talk to the actual servers was through the API. So even though the API team was separate, the topmost layer of the application had to use the technology whether they wanted to or not. There was no way to get around it. So while things were separate, things still worked. And it worked that way.
Other questions? Yeah.
The company's about to release an API next month, and what's a good way to promote it, like on Mashable or run a contest for developers? What's a good way for a company to promote their own APIs or release things?
So if you have an API and you're going to launch it, how do you get publicity for that? How do you get people building on it? How do you get that to spread?
Release cool apps with it. Don't just punt the code out or the documentation out over the wall and expect people to find it. Launch partners always help. So give someone early access to your API and let them be evangelists for you. Before OpenAIM actually went out the door, Apple was one of our best evangelists. iChat and iMessage, which you guys use, everyone hopefully today, is actually using the OpenAIM APIs and have been for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And rather than give really specific recommendations, I recommend that you look at the industry leaders in what's called developer relations or developer evangelism and basically get some ideas from them. I know at least one developer evangelist in the audience who's sitting right there. Hi, Swift. The SendGrid developer evangelist is here, so he can tell you a little bit more too. But having good example apps is huge. Having good sample code is huge. Think like a developer and try to solve their problems and then tell them how you're solving their problems. It's marketing, but don't call it that because developers won't like it if you go a little too markety on them. But if you basically think like a developer and make their life easier and wow them, it'll go a long way.
And hackathons are a good way of promoting your API. We just recently we had a hackathon with Washington Post, and it was in 2 days. More than 100 developers showed up, and 10 apps has been built, and really cool apps. And it's now their API kind of on a promoted, and that's hackathon is a good way to promote API.
Yeah, getting other developers to promote your API is really the best method here too. I know at lunch, one of you, I can't remember who it was, but one of you was telling the other one about how awesome Twilio was. So I didn't have to do it, right? Someone else did it for you. So if you get customers excited enough that they're doing the evangelizing, that's amazing. That's what you really want. That's the best kind of marketing.
One more question?
So you all talked about 5 APIs that you're extremely excited about. Could you maybe give an example of one that you found disappointing and maybe talk about why?
So maybe two of you could throw up one. We don't want to necessarily crucify a bunch of APIs to close this down.
And I think we've given Facebook hard enough time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so first of all, I want to clarify, I'm not exactly excited about Berkeley sockets. I just think it's really important. Twitter, actually, is really disappointing to me. Not because of the API itself, but because of what the company has chosen to do with the API. There was a point, I think Twitter as an API has a lot of potential to be more of a generalized messaging bus for the entire internet, rather than another venue for shoving ads in my face. So it's disappointing from the standpoint of a business perspective and not from an API perspective, which is maybe not what you were asking about particularly, but that is very disappointing to me.
Any others we want to throw into the bus before we wrap?
Yeah, I was thinking of one, but then I just changed my mind and not throw them under the bus. But actually, in some ways, HTML5 has been frustrating for some. I mean, the Facebook experience that we just talked about, native platforms are beating the web, at least in the case of Facebook. I'm not going to say that in general, but I think there's, for me particularly, I feel like the documentation actually and just the samples and all of that stuff around HTML5, the more complex stuff, using Canvas and things like that, have not quite been there as well as it could have been so far for me.
I just thought of one that's really awesome that it should have been on my 5 list, which is Stripe. If you're doing any kind of payment processing, developers are totally head over heels with Stripe, so check it out.
That's good. Now we can end on a positive note, and obviously lots of people might want to have more questions for these folks. Feel free to approach them during the rest of the day or right after here. Thank you guys for being here. Let's give it up for our panelists for participating.
And thanks for being our fearless leader, Matt.
Hey, no problem. Thanks, guys.